This session is a normal kind of session which we have at the end of an ESPAS conference, not only to provide the leaders of the network to be able to say what they like, but also to have a feedback from anybody in the network from where we might be going. It's known as the good American parlance, but it's actually a very nice, relaxed kind of occasion. Not quite maybe as relaxed as last session, but we will see how we get on with this particular way of doing things. I thought that just comment on three thoughts to begin our discussion today. That of all the ESPAS conferences that I've been to, and I've been to all of them, this is the best yet. This was a conference which was superbly executed in an interinstitutional cooperation. And we had not only the session yesterday on the Commission, on foresight and strategic game changers, but today we've had a really good session too in the European Parliament on the making of a new geopolitical order. What we had was at the beginning of the session yesterday, Anne mentioned that we will be doing in ESPAS a document for March 2019, updating the document 2030, which we have, and that the material which has been arranged part of the conference, other material which we have, will all be part of making up the document which will be released now in 18 months' time. And I thought that a way of looking ahead and giving a little bit of stimulus to the session now we have in front of us, three thoughts which came to mind. And the first is that it's always good in a network to be able to have an aim and an objective of where we're heading, particularly one which allows involvement of all the participants of the network. So that, I think, is an important point. It's about involvement. Secondly, it's about ideas. And sometimes in politics, we can be rather scarce on ideas of knowing what we want to be able to do. But we've had it overflowing with ideas from the conferences, which we had yesterday and today, but also because there is a working group already under the chairmanship of Frank Debier, and I see Frank here in the audience, which is already beginning to draft a list of think pieces which we already have in mind, which are not yet completed, and therefore your contribution this afternoon could well be key of the kind of think pieces we'll be looking at over the next 12 months ahead. And then lastly, in this conference we've had more representatives from member states in the past, and I very much welcome that, because I think that we'll be stronger by their involvement and their contribution to this process in terms of the impact that we'd finally make with the document, so that then we'd be able to make sure that as we go through this process over the next 18 months, policymakers, whether in the EU institutions or whether they're in the member states participating in the EU process, will then also feel to be involved. And for me in the network, if you're involved, then you have ownership of the document at the end of the day. So, Jim, maybe I can turn to you first to be able to say what you would like to say at the outset, and then Anne, and then Klaus.
Thanks, James. Thanks very much. The way you started is the way we start each year. Each year we say this was the best conference yet. The interesting thing is it's true each year, so I'm looking forward to next year's. I watched 2/3 of the Young Talents Network's performance, and it's a very hard act to follow for oldies like us. I would just point out to them that mercifully they left Mettler alive in 20 years' time. But I'm a bit sad about Carl Bildt, and I can guarantee you he'll still be around, you know. As to the others around the table, I don't know. But it was a great performance. And it's always nice, because normally when you do forecasting, people actually talk about the present. And to project yourself into the future and then look backwards is a nice way. Years ago, I gave a speech on my retirement, which is still supposed to be in 2020, but this was in, I don't know, 95, 96. And so I decided to give my farewell speech, and a bit similar in this way, but I wasn't as funny as you were. Let me say quickly a few things. There are many things which struck me. I would start by saying one thing about the Americans this year. Last year, I complained that maybe there were too many Americans and we hadn't reached out to other regions. This year, that's probably why the organizers put it on Thanksgiving. We didn't have that many American friends, and we had more from abroad, which is very good. But I would now say something about the Frank. I have heard several times that The world is completely changing, and the Anglo-Saxon world is going to come to an end and all of that. What I would like to say is there clearly is something happening in Washington. And as Simon Serfati said, I am told yesterday over dinner, but also in a bilateral talk I had with him, is that America will come back. This will not last. But above all, he said, it's for you Europeans at this time to step in and to step up to the plate. Now, this is something which I have always felt. I used to be in charge of transatlantic relations a few years ago, and I was always struck by the way we're dealing with the Americans, completely accepting all kinds of diktats, and at the same time carping from the sidelines and complaining all the time. And I've always said that we should construct a more equal relationship, which is in the interest of the transatlantic relationship, but also the world. I have also for a long time been saying, and I said this when I went to Washington many years ago in the middle of the crisis about Iraq, that the world will become multipolar. And I was always being attacked. That was an anti-American attack, which is absolute rubbish. We are in the multipolar world now. It has come very quickly. And in this multipolar world, there are poles like the United States, and there is a pole like the European Union. It's not the same, but of course, we are quite close to each other, and I still think the transatlantic relationship will remain important. I just wanted to make this point. There were many other points, EU and Mediterranean, EU and Russia. There was a very interesting debate we had at various occasions. It's EU values and democracy. And at the dinner I organized yesterday, Heather Grabber said something very interesting. She said people have a tendency to oppose interests and values. He said, actually, it's not like that. It is about opposing short-term and long-term interests. Because in the short term, of course, if you stick to values, it can look as though you're forsaking some of your interests. But she said if you look at it in the longer term, it's not the case at all. I thought that was, for me, one of the extremely important remarks. Another thing is about the EU and the use of force. That was a question which came up in the panel which I chaired this morning. It is also a very interesting question because we have in the past had a tendency, you know, whenever the European Union makes a statement to any problem in the world, I mean, anybody in this room could write it very simply because this, please, political solution, no use of force and arms and all this. I mean, always the same. Actually, as Florence said this morning, sometimes you have to use force. So I think that was also for me very interesting. And then the whole question of technology, which clearly is going to change the whole world. At the same time, we don't know exactly how it's going to change the world. But I was struck by the remarks of Dimitri Trenin, who was violently contesting the fact that technology was going to run everything, and she said it's still the big beast and the big elements and the geostrategic partner. So I thought that was an interesting caveat, but let's be clear, technology will be there. We don't know what it's going to bring, good, bad, probably both, and we'll have to manage it somehow. I think I'll stop here. There were many other interesting things to be said, but I think Anne will say them, or Klaus. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, let me first of all say I, of course, agree that this was the best ESPAS conference yet, but also to thank everyone, because a part of what makes it better is not just the content, but also this sense of community that I think we've been able to build up over the years, and it's very nice to see so many of you coming back again and again. Before I go to what I was going to say, I want to just say how incredibly gratifying and happy I am now to see what the young leaders have just contributed. And I say that really when I was first approached about ESPAS, I remember Anthony Teasdale and I had a lunch, and I said, you know, if we're doing something about the future, we need to include sort of the next generation of leaders in this, because it's going to be them who are going to have to deal with this. And you know, it's one thing to have an idea, it's another one to then make it happen. And I have to say, to the credit of the many people who made it happen, I just had the idea, but it is so wonderful to now see it really come to life and to fruition, and more power to you. I mean, it is really wonderful for me to see you engaged in what might be the world like in 2035. Now to my remarks, sort of, and despite some of the gloominess that we always hear about Europe, and that certainly was present at this event, of course, as well, coming, by the way, mostly from Europeans themselves. We're very used to that. I want to also conclude that I believe that what these 2 days have now led me to believe is that Europe actually has a very important role to play in the coming years. And I mean, it was said many times at the event that globalization has come under tremendous pressure. So I think it will be in many ways for us to defend the rules-based multilateral order that frankly has served us very well since the end of the World War II era. And I still believe that liberal democracy and that rule of law and that free and open media, that human rights, and that also the social market economy which underpins the European project, that all of this is still very attractive and very valid, and perhaps even more so than ever before. I mean, what I think we're all seeing is that we're moving into an age and an era where illiberalism will play, unfortunately, a greater role, and that the world, you know, we must at least try to withstand that trend. I mean, because what we have built up here is very important. And I want to just point to 3 areas where I think Europe can and must play an important role. Firstly, it's on trade. And it's really been very much my boss, if I can say so, who has tried to design trade a little bit, not just from free trade, but to free and fair trade. And what that means in practice is that we see trade also as a way of exporting our standards and our values. And I think that the previous panel with the young leaders, the young talents, actually brought that across very brilliantly. Trade today is not as much about tariffs as it is about standards. And I think here there's a unique opportunity and an important opportunity that Europe must play. I was distraught when last week the TPP that was supposed to help raise standards in Asia was actually watered down following the withdrawal of the United States. And it was for that reason that Canada almost pulled out of this new TPP. But this is exactly what trade, good trade, free and fair trade can try to prevent. And this is what we're trying to do in Europe. And I think it's very important. And let me just say, Europe is a trade powerhouse. We have 61 free trade agreements already with countries around the world. We just concluded with Canada. We concluded on in a very short time span with Japan. We are opening with Australia and New Zealand, and next up are Mercosur and Mexico. So I just want to say that no one underestimate us in trade. No one. We have hundreds of some of the best trade negotiators in the world. That is not easy to replicate. So on trade, I think we have to play a very important role. Secondly, on multilateralism and global governance, it's very important that the EU continue to support the Bretton Woods Institution, the WTO, and the United Nations. And I also believe that we have to play a very important role in shaping the digital economy. I have to say, when I recently went to the Web Summit in Lisbon, I was overwhelmed by the requests and the demands that I heard for us to play a role here, because it is so obvious that others will not. And we have to get a grip on fake news. We have to get a grip on online radicalization, and we have to get a grip on cybersecurity. And I think it will be left to us, frankly, to do a lot of this work. And let me also mention AI. It was actually at the Web Summit that there was a video by Stephen Hawking saying that AI will either be the biggest boon for humanity or it will be our downfall. And I think that increasingly there's consensus around it. So the question I ask is, can we leave all of that to China? The third point I want to make is we need to achieve a greater balance between capital and labor. And I think it is without doubt that there has been a lot of social dislocation in many countries. And I was very proud last Friday. I was in Göteborg for a social summit that my boss helped convene with the Swedish Prime Minister. And it is very important in democracies that we now use this moment to reaffirm and to tell our citizens that social welfare states will be kept intact, even if they will function very differently, perhaps, in the future. And we really need to do that because there's a lot of anxiety, and understandably so, about what the future will hold. We know we will work in very different ways. There will be more transitions in our lives. And it was absolutely correct that our leaders came together to reaffirm very clearly that we believe in a social Europe and that we will adapt our welfare states accordingly to this digital age. I think that that was actually very, very important, and it was the right time to do so, because we see what can happen in electorates if such large parts of the population feel that they have been left behind. And whatever we do in Europe, we must prevent this from happening. So there are many doubts about the European economy, as always, and I'm wrapping up in a moment. So I thought I just want to set the record straight for where we are now. We've already begun, I'm sorry to say, to work with EU27 data. So this is data without the United Kingdom. We're already starting to work with this. Let me say the EU27 is, of course, still the world's second largest economy. We are still at EU27 by far the largest trade bloc. We are still the largest source and destination of foreign direct investment. And if anyone doubts our competitiveness, the trade surplus for the EU27 in 2016 stood at 568 billion euros. Made in Europe is attractive, and these figures speak for themselves. The euro is the world's second largest reserve currency. 1.5 trillion euros are held by central banks around the world. And I thought I'd just say this because I am frankly tired of these perennial doubts about Europe's economy and its strength. And we must build on this. There is no guarantee that this will continue forever. But right now, if we don't seize this moment, then we only have ourselves to blame. Thank you.
I think I could immediately continue there, because once a year I go to the United States. So when I was in New York this year in August, and we also met with some financial institutions, they were saying the euro is now our safe haven, because we don't trust in the dollar because of Trump, and we don't trust in the pound because of Brexit. So we are investing into the euro. And that's something we haven't heard for some years, but I think it fits into the picture. It's absolutely true, and that maybe was a common feature in different debates here, that old certainties have gone. We can no longer just continue into the future trends which have been there for some time. We have to be open for surprise. But the real issue is how do you react to such a situation of change? And I believe the European Union has been reacting to Trump and Putin and Brexit by looking forward, and has taken it as an additional inspiration to move ahead, rather than stay where we are and being scared. That doesn't mean that causes for trouble are not taken into consideration, but it means exactly the opposite. It's clear that we are faced with changes in the party political system in the European Union by parties which are commonly called populist parties, but our Vice President has called them in his introductory speech nationalist parties. And those parties, by the way, wouldn't contradict that nomination. But what we have to understand is that they are getting more successful because their core promise is to protect. And if the European Union is not able to transmit that we can also protect in an open system, and we don't have to get closed, and open among ourselves, but also open towards the global level, then we would be in trouble. But I believe that's exactly where we are already, with the Bratislava Declaration of 2016 of the 27 heads of state and government. And it means that the European Union will need to change. In order to be able to protect, we cannot just work with legislation. We will also need complementary executive capacity, which means we need to be able to help out to secure borders. We will need to be able to pool our information in fighting terrorism. We will need to be able to manage immigration properly if we want to keep an open system inside. And we will also need to go more and more, and recent decisions are very encouraging, into the area of security and defense. So in fact, the agenda that was prescribed by Bratislava is on the one hand taking the concerns on board, but it's turning them positively towards the future rather than to withdraw into national fortresses, where we know that they on their own and without the complement of the European Union can't really deliver the results. And of course, Brexit is taking away capacity from the European Union, but it's adding capacity to act. Because those areas where we now have to take decisions were exactly the areas where Britain was rather on the brakes than on the gas pedal. I see the speeches of President Juncker, State of the Union, and of Macron as absolutely complementary. It's true that President Juncker's speech is more in the traditional community method, President Macron's speech a little bit less, but they both are descriptions on how we get to this new European Union, which is developing complementary executive capacity. The 27 are surprisingly united. After Brexit, there was a lot of speculation that infighting would start, but the 27 are united, and the institutions are more united, at least as I have seen them over the last decade. So this is a good opportunity to bring in the person whose house the European Parliament has acquired many years ago and is actively managing, Jean Monnet. The question is not whether we have issues or not. The question is how do we confront it? And I like his saying, I'm neither pessimist nor optimist. We could say we are resolved, and that's a good description of where the European Union actually is.
Well, thank you very much to all three of you for inspiring contributions at the end of what's been a long day, and indeed a long conference too. We have about 15 minutes now for the opportunity for you to, from the audience, be able to ask questions. If you'd let us know who you are, and please focus on questions rather than long commentaries, because we don't have a huge amount of time left, and then it'll give everybody an opportunity to make their points. So who would be first off amongst you all?
Thomas Arnold, DG Research Innovation. Thanks for those priorities. Where would you fit sustainability in those? Is this an extra one, or does it fit everywhere in the three? Thank you.
I think in a matter of procedures, probably most effective, I'll take as many questions as we can, and then each of the speakers can then reply to those questions, and I suppose it then leaves me to answer those questions which you don't answer, but it may not be like that. Right, that's the first one. Next one, please.
Thank you. First, my name is Katarina Engberg. I represent the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies. First, I wanted to thank the organizers for an excellent conference, very stimulating, food for thought for the work that we bring back to capitals, in my case. And I have a remark, a question of methodological or philosophical character, and that is, as you enter the new phase of analysis of trends, it is, in my mind, very important that you have a mind that is shaped in terms of making the analysis looking for opportunities as well as challenges. Because many of these exercises are sort of framed on the methodology that has come from the defense sector. You're looking for crises that may occur that you have to manage. But I think it's important for the European Union to also look for the opportunities. There are lots of opportunities ahead that has to be noted and seized upon by the European Union. And that, of course, will make us more proactive and more optimistic about the future and not paralyzed by fear of the future.
Thank you very much. There's one at the back behind you.
Hi, Bart Shevchuk, European Political Strategy Center. What are the biggest risks that concern you for the next 12 months? Sort of the flip side of the previous question. But what 2 or 3 risks do you foresee for the next 12 months?
There's another one next door there.
I was interested in...
Say who you are.
Oh, sorry, Kat Tully from the School of International Futures. Kat Amanpour, actually. Forgot, sorry. I have just a question, maybe a little bit of a boring question about wiring diagrams and capability building and networks and getting the strategic foresight message out and the capability built. What are the opportunities for working across the EU institutions and the nation states, civil servants, in particular around national security councils, in particular around policy planning staff or prime minister's offices, and what's the potential for kind of creating a kind of movement? Foresight basically has to be a social movement. Everybody's got something invested in it, but how do we inspire people to do this more effectively?
Thank you very much. There's another one here.
Corinne Elles, Futurible, a private think tank in Paris. I was worried by the number of trade agreements announced by Mrs. Mettler. And as a French citizen, I was very worried during the last elections in France because we feared that we could have Marine Le Pen as a president, and we are very happy to have Mr. Macron. But it seems to me that the European Union must really pay attention to the pace of the new agreements. And it could be very dangerous, in my opinion, to be too quick with this kind of agreements. So I would like to have more information, and I think it was very important to be to explain the reason why, and to be sure that it corresponds to the weightings of the people.
Right, I see a last question behind. If we take that one, then we'll come back to the panel.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much also from my side for organizing the conference and for having us all here. Very short question, Christine Schikupfer from the MacArthur Institute for China Studies. What would be your one question message to young Chinese? Why is Europe important for them?
Well, Thank you very much for your questions. I now turn to our panel, our expert panel indeed. But Jim, would you like to fire off on any of the ones which have been posed, and then I'll come to Anne and then lastly to Klaus.
Yes, there are many fascinating questions. We could maybe add another day to the conference tomorrow. On the sustainability, I don't exactly know what sustainability means. I know it's one of those weasel words which people bandy about all the time. I suppose my answer would be, when we invest in a climate change policy like the Paris Agreement, we try to save it even though the Americans are no longer part of it. I think we work for sustainability. When we try to strengthen our energy infrastructure within Europe and the exchanges, I think we work for sustainability. I think if we manage the migration crisis in a better way than we initially started by managing it, we work for sustainability. I think concerning trade, I think this point was made by Anne, if we inject into the debate about the economic prosperity the argument about social aspects, I think we work for sustainability, because one of the biggest threats to the sustainability of our system, our society, is inequality, and the way globalization only favors, leaves out quite an important chunk of people. On the second question, yes, challenges and opportunities. Let's be honest, the European Union has an old record of waiting till there is a real crisis before we move. We get moving. I mean, that's the way politics works, particularly when you have 28 member states and many institutions. You've seen the reaction to Brexit and Trump. I mean, for me, that was spectacular. It changed the quality of the debate, certainly at the level of the European Councils, where I sit in, quite dramatically. And in a way, I see the crisis over the last few years has forced us to start growing up on certain issues. For instance, that not everybody around Europe is just waiting to take over our values, for instance, which seemed to be our belief before. That EMU, for instance, the system was good, but it was to some extent a fair weather system. So we needed the crisis to see that there were certain important things missing. Migration, the Dublin system is a very good system when things work normally. When you have a total a sort of massive inflow of people, it collapses. So we have been obliged by the crisis to look at our system and improve it, and I think that's what we've done. On the risks, I don't want to speculate. My answer will be wait for black swans, but because they're black swans, I can't tell you which ones they are. On capability building, well, ESPAS is a good example, and the Young Talents Network is the future. On trade, the French lady, it was a very French intervention because your president said exactly the same. So I have to be careful in what I answer. I would simply say that this event brings me back to what I said about social, about globalization and all that. You have to find the right balance. The leaders had an excellent debate, also thanks to President Macron in June about this. And as a result of that, for the first time in years, we've actually started moving on trade defense instruments or dumping, anti-dumping procedures and all that. So it is moving. Now, you always have to weigh the balances. I mean, Mercosur frightens the French. Why? Because of beef and because of agriculture and all that. And that's a legitimate concern. At the same time, Mercosur is a major player in the longer term. And a deal with Mercosur would be 10 times CETA. 6 times Japan. So we have to look also at the overall geostrategic thing. And of course, the argument to sometimes take more time is a valid argument, but it's also sometimes be used not to do anything. They say, you know, when in one of the member states in the discussion starts saying that quality before speed, it normally means we don't want the deal. And for the Chinese, now I have no inspiration. I leave this to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. Anne, please.
I think I'll start with the Katharina's question on trends and look for opportunities. Yes, it's actually, I mean, for me, been very surprising now being part sort of the foresight community, also how how you focus much more on risks than opportunities. But I think that's where my day job as sort of running the internal strategy unit comes in, where of course we must focus very much on opportunities. And I think everything I just said was around opportunities, you know, because what I'm saying is we need to step up to the plate because there is an opportunity for important global leadership that I think we need to assume. On the opportunities to work across, I mean, what I can report from where I sit is that really in all member states, right now the sort of foresight anticipation capabilities seem to be strengthened because a lot of people are coming to see me. We're all talking. A lot of you are here. So this is happening. I would argue that probably right now this happens mostly in a sort of ad hoc, informal way, and so perhaps in the future there would be a way to think about how to do this in a more sort of coordinated manner. But let me say that it's precisely sort of this informality that works for this. I know this is something else that works for this community. But just to say, where I see this as a growing sort of sector in the public domain. On the trade agreements, I have nothing left to say other than that I already pointed out that what we are doing is free and fair trade. I mean, if Europe will be in, I think, 2050, 4% of the global population. I mean, if we want to have any sway on anything, A, we need to work together, and B, we need to try to export our standards and values and the gentleman who talked about sustainability, have environmental standards be part of the trade deals, have labor standards be part of it. So, I mean, trade is how we engage. And by the way, your country does quite well, so I don't know what all the anxiety really at the end of the day is about. And as part of the free and fair trade, we now have an investment screening system that we are introducing at the European level. So we're not naive free traders, but we do understand that globalization and the trade is an integral part of it. On the inspiration for young Chinese, I would say that if you care about tolerance, equality, rights, for instance, the LGBT rights, if you want an unparalleled quality of life, clean air, I'm sorry, I mean, our air is still cleaner. We complain about it, but compared to much of the rest of the world, you know, we have clean air. If you care about all this, and you care about also the open internet, I mean, there are now moves in the US to crack down, essentially, to do away with net neutrality. China doesn't have a free internet to begin with. If you care about openness and freedom, then Europe is the place for you. That's what I would say to young Chinese. And I think that there's a new generation coming that cares deeply about all this. And right now, I'm sorry to say, they don't have a lot of places to turn to. So I think this is our opportunity.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you. Klaus, please.
Yeah, thank you. First on the question sustainability. I think that sustainability means that we systematically give preference for the mid and long term. So I don't see it as limited to the environment. It's a systematic preference for the mid and long term. And that's something which is becoming more difficult in the media environment we are now living in. So going for sustainability means you need to be ready to be criticized or told you haven't understood the mood of the time, because that newspaper article or that series of newspaper articles are not so important. It's important what you do with effect for the mid and long term. And that needs courage, especially from politicians to make that choice. I very much agree on the comment concerning risk. By the way, I've asked the same question inside the house here when we introduced risk management. And I've been asking, why don't we introduce opportunity management? Because it can be very dangerous to just focus on risks. And the older organizations become, the more they are becoming normally defensive, rules-based, and risk-averse. And that's, let's say, that's a mindset which is not very healthy, but let's say a precursor to to dying, in fact. So we should rather focus on unused opportunities. I've just asked our legal service in a project to come up with, and please inform me, what is the unused potential under the treaty? So not what is allowed under the treaty or where are the limits, which we are hearing very often in debates, but I would like to know what is the unused potential under the treaty. Because treaties are documents which are kind of burying opportunities which are waiting to be discovered. One example is all the new formulations on security and defense, which have gone into the treaty with the Lisbon Treaty, and for nearly 10 years, we haven't been doing anything with them. So rather than immediately having in a debate a comment what is not allowed or what is difficult or where there are the limits, I think we should kind of turn the treaties by 180 degrees and start to have a look at what are still all the opportunities sleeping there, which just need a little wake-up call, and which would give us so many additional opportunities to do more. And what would I tell to young Chinese? I've been writing a work, end of my student times in 1991, on democratization in Taiwan, which was a difficult time because there was still the martial law and so on. And there was still very much the argument, and I think it's still being used, that China is so big and so diverse that you can't really have democracy. So what I would tell to the young Chinese is, if we can have democracy in a European Union with so many different states, so many different regions, so many different backgrounds, so many different languages, such a hostile history, one towards the other, you could have democracy as well.
Well, thank you. I would like, as we now terminate the conference, to say 3 thank yous. First, obviously, to all of you for being here. I think lasted the course, you stayed the course, and you've found, I think, overall, our participation has been really tremendous. So thank you very much indeed to all of you. My second thank you is to echo what you, Anne, said, was actually thank you to the organizers, because I know what it's like to run this kind of thing. To Ricardo particularly, and to Danielle, I think you deserve a very strong round of applause, and of course to him as well. To all your team, Ricardo, I'd like to say so. Fine, well, is there somebody else I should mention, Ricardo? Oh, absolutely. Listen, there are lots of people, but I know that you had to take the brunt yesterday, and Danielle has taken the brunt today. Not to thank everybody, so let's thank everybody for the organization. Bye. And of course, last but not least, is thank you to you guys. Because, no, I don't do anything. I just float around as honorary president. I would like to thank you particularly because you all 3, as many, of course, we've got in the steering group, have shown exceptional leadership and commitment to this whole process. I can't believe myself for what it actually turned into from a little seedling about 10 years ago. But thank you from the bottom of my heart, and actually from all of us, to you for the leadership you provide. And we're looking forward to the future, of course, as well. Thank you very much indeed.